You get a token, you get a token, you get a token, everybody gets tokens! Cimoooooooo! What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. Now, today I wanted to bring to you a discussion on the resurgence of tokens and the impact that tokens are actually going to have potentially on the meta once Link Summoning is released in the TCG. Now, the OCG at the time of making this video is going to be getting Link Summoning in about a week or two, and we're going to see how this is going to affect them firsthand. And we actually got a ruling out of Japan that tokens are actually going to be viable materials in order to summon Link monsters. Now, why that's so crucial is because it basically means that a myriad of different cards, including Gofu, including Scapegoat, Phantom Skyblaster, and Dandelion, are now all prime candidates and token producers that are going to essentially give us free advantage that we can then convert into Link monsters and help us further extend our plays once the Link format comes around. Now, this is just really, really big, and a lot of people are freaking out. The secondary market's taking off and people are buying out all of these cards for this very reason, because let's start off with a card like Gofu. I think Gofu is probably the best example of why the token production is so good, because when you have Gofu, you special summon it out to the board and you get 2 additional tokens. You turn those 2 tokens into a pair of Link Spiders, because Link Spider is a Link 1 monster that only requires a normal monster to summon. So with one of your tokens, you put a Link Spider into the extra deck zone, then you use your other token to produce a second Link Spider, which you can then place in the extra deck slot that the first Link Spider produced. From there, you can take those 2 Link Spiders, since they're Earth, and you can make a Mrs. Radiant, or if you also want, you can take all 3 and make Decode Talker, depending on the play you're trying to achieve. Now, the fact that Gofu does all of this for 1 card, and the fact that it doesn't need to commit a normal summon in addition to that, is fucking ridiculous. And quite frankly, now that we know this, I think Gofu actually has a very high chance of getting hit on the ban list in some form or another, because if not, there's really no reason, if you're playing Link monsters, to pretty much not splash in 3 copies of Gofu into your deck, because in addition to the fact that Gofu is already this good, if your deck is running copies of Allure of Darkness and things like that already, you have a way to turbo out and get rid of extra copies of Gofu if you don't need it. So the fact that it just has a dark attribute and has all these other good things going for it, like being a tuner, because once you do that, you can use other monsters to tune into other things. It's ridiculous. And quite frankly, there's a very high chance that it's going to be struck on the ban list in some form or another. Now, moving on to a card like Scapegoat, a lot of people are kind of polarized on their opinions of Scapegoat and whether or not it's going to be good. The reason why Scapegoat is very powerful for Link format is because the tokens are Earth, which means that 2 of them can make a Mrs. Radiant, because Mrs. Radiant requires 2 Earth monsters in order to be summoned. Now, I'm of the opinion, rather, that I feel that Scapegoat's actually very good, because I feel that since we're going to be moving into a somewhat slower format, Scapegoat actually has some viability. Now, it's not very proactive, because you can't use Scapegoat on your turn and then, can proceed to do your plays, because you need to wait a turn because of Scapegoat's stipulation. You need to set it, wait a turn, hope that it doesn't get hit by like MST or Twin Twister in the end phase, and then if on your end phase, or on your opponent's end phase rather, you'll flip it up, you'll get your tokens, and then you can do whatever the fuck you want with the tokens. The thing is, it's really good because, if anything, you could use the Scapegoat to pretty much absorb a couple of your opponent's attacks if we're going to be in this slower format, and then you're going to have your 2 Scapegoat tokens left over that you can make your Mrs. Radiant. You now have 2 new extra deck monster zones unlocked, and then you're pretty much completely unhindered to do whatever plays you like. So it's really cool and has the flexibility of not only allowing you to go into your Link summoning plays for basically free, other than the fact you have to wait a turn, but it also duels as a battle absorption or a battle negator kind of card as well. Unless you're going up against like a Chaos Max, then you're just completely fucked. But the other people are arguing that because it's not proactive and you have to wait a turn to use it, that it is hindered by that and you can't really go off. And in a game where each turn is so vital and crucial in advancing your game state to ultimately end up winning the game, then Scapegoat might be a little bit too slow. But it really is ultimately going to depend on how the format shapes up. You know, if the format is still relatively fast, then I will agree that Scapegoat isn't going to be as good. But if the format slows down tremendously, then Scapegoat will see play. Now moving on to another card, Phantom Skyblaster is another card that's also being bought out because it is another good token producer. Now, Skyblaster has some very similar traits to Gofu in the fact that it is of dark attribute, so it has some Allure of Darkness synergy as well, which is really good. But Phantom Skyblaster is kind of like a slower, shittier version of Gofu because you need to normal summon it or have it be flipped face up, which quite frankly, flipping is not the most common thing nowadays, so you have to burn your normal summon, and in addition to that, you can only create Skyblaster tokens that are equal to the number of cards you have already on the field. So if you just normal summon the Phantom Skyblaster, like you're only going to get 1 token. If you have another monster on the field, you can make 2, and that's probably the best case scenario. So hypothetically, you could go like Photon Thrasher, Skyblaster, get 2 tokens, and then you can use those 2 tokens to go into Link Spiders, and then the Link Spiders can go into a Mrs. Radiant, which unlocks 2 extra deck zones. Then you can overlay the Thrasher and the Skyblaster to make a rank 4 play and proceed to go on from there. So Skyblaster has some really good things going for it, but like I said, it's kind of a much slower version of Gofu, but the fact that it is level 4 and it's dark and having Fiend typing is somewhat relevant in some decks as well, I suppose, can be a real good boost depending on the scenario. I really think the level 4 is probably the best thing that Skyblaster has going for it for the myriad of rank 4 decks that we could pretty much argue that rank 4 is the most powerful level in the entire game. Now, last but not least, I want to cover a card that I don't think a lot of people are really thinking about, and that's Dandelion. Now, Dandelion, once it's sent to the graveyard, produces 2 tokens. Now, the unfortunate thing about these 2 tokens is that they are of wind attribute, so that means you can't immediately go into a Mrs. Radiant, but you can go into a pair of Link Spiders and then go into the Mrs. Radiant, and now you have 2 extra deck slots open for the cost of a Dandelion going to the graveyard, which is pretty good. I mean, ultimately, if we can get a Mrs. Radiant on the board for 1 card, we're pretty much set in terms of whatever our deck is trying to achieve. But the thing is, there's so many different ways to get Dandelion into the graveyard. There's cards like Mathematician, and Mathematician happens to also be an Earth type, so if you want to have another way to access Mrs. Radiant, you've got that synergy there with Mathematician. Mathematician is also one of the best just generic cards in the game. It draws you a card when it's destroyed by battle, so it's pretty good. And it's going to send that to the graveyard. You've got cards like Foolish Burial. There's a myriad of different cards that can get Dandelion into the graveyard with ease, depending on the deck that you're playing. So ultimately, if you're playing a deck that can support Dandelion, then I would very, very much recommend playing it because it just, the free tokens and the chance to make a free Mrs. Radiant to extend your combos is going to be really key in Link format. Now, the last thing I kind of wanted to touch on is this really going to matter? Because if people start playing decks that don't really rely so much on the extra deck. So for instance, we don't have True Kings yet here in the TCG, but True Kings are a deck that very much so don't really rely on the extra deck. They're basically Monarch 2.0. Then you have Monarchs as another example. You have Water that doesn't really need the extra deck. You have Blue Eyes, which Blue Eyes uses the extra deck, but it doesn't need to spam the board with extra deck monsters. You have Infernoid. There's a lot of different deck options in the Link summoning format that don't need to use the extra deck. And so if that's the case, and if that's what people start to migrate towards, then all these token producers ultimately aren't going to matter because the decks are going to function well enough by themselves that they don't need to start playing gimmicky cards like Gofu, like Phantom Skyblaster, like Dandelion, like Scapegoat for that matter. but people might come up with some really cool combos in terms of the token production and make them very, very viable. Another thing that I don't think is going to become popular, but could, is that the Mecha Phantom Beast archetype is the whole archetype is almost centered around token production, and if someone can create a deck that actually sustainably creates enough tokens and makes enough plays that the link summoning mechanic boosts the deck and takes it to another level, or comes up with some ridiculously crazy brew altogether, then, you know, Mecha Phantom Beast might actually see some relevance. You know, we've had Dracosac tokens back in the day since Dragon Ruler format, so I mean, we might be able to see some other crazy Mecha Phantom Beast brew. I think we saw it one at some European YCS maybe a couple years back, so it's possible, but ultimately it's really just going to come down to what people prefer. Do they prefer to play these token-based builds in their newer, modernized version link summoning legal decks, or do they want to just play decks that don't care about link summoning at all and just want to do what they do best, you know, like Water, like Infernoid, etc., etc. But guys, that's just my opinion. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about the whole token ruling and about what other maybe really good token cards we might see that people are going to get creative with in order to just give their link summoning capabilities a boost and help take their decks to the next level. So guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and also be sure to back me on Patreon, because by pledging just $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.